People think of lions as proud, untouchable kings of the wild, never bowing, never begging. But one morning on the open Makulu plains, that image was shattered. A father lion, gaunt from 5 days without food or rest, did something no wild animal had done before. He sought help from humans. His cub, a tiny lion barely a few months old, was dying, his left eye swollen with a massive abscess. There was no healing this in the wild, no time left. And in a world where the strong survive and the weak fade in silence, this father made an impossible choice, and with that choice, an unforgettable journey began. The fifth sunrise cast a pale golden light over the Makulu plains, but it brought no warmth. A breeze drifted across the dry grasses, whispering over the Savannah like a ghost of what once was a thriving world of life. Beneath the twisted branches of a thorn acacia tree, a lion cub lay still, curled awkwardly against the earth, as if trying to hide from the pain that consumed him. One side of his face was grotesquely swollen. The bulge beneath his eye gleamed like a pale, stretched blister, tense, unnatural, and terrifying. Beside the cub stood a male lion, silent and unmoving. His name was Elias. He didn't pace. He didn't roar. He simply stood guard, the muscles in his legs trembling not from exhaustion, but from something deeper, helplessness. This was his son, his only one. The cub's name was Noah, and for nearly 5 days now, Elias had not left his side. No hunting, no resting, no chasing away scavengers. Only watching, only waiting, only hoping that whatever curse had taken hold of Noah's eye would somehow loosen its grip and release the cub from suffering. But nature doesn't work that way. Not here, not under the African sun. The swelling had begun 2 nights earlier as a faint irritation, nothing more than a little watering, a soft redness around the eyelid. Elias hadn't noticed until Noah stopped playing. The cub was always so curious, so full of questions for the wind and insects and shifting grasses. But that morning, Noah had crouched in the tall grass and squinted at the light, one eye already closing. And then the swelling came, fast, vicious, a bulge that grew larger with each hour, pushing at the skin from within as if something rotten festered underneath. By the end of the 2nd day, Noah could no longer walk straight. He bumped into rocks, staggered sideways when the wind picked up, and sometimes collapsed after only a few steps. By the 3rd day, he could no longer rise at all. Elias had nudged him with his nose that morning. He'd waited, holding his breath as the cub shivered and tried to lift his head. And then came the moment Elias had not been ready for. Noah looked up at him and could not see. That eye, his left, was completely obscured by the swelling. The other only stared into emptiness. Elias let out a low, guttural sound, not a roar, something quieter, sadder. This wasn't how the wild was supposed to work. Cubs were supposed to fall, get up, and run again. Injuries happened, scratches, bruises, even broken bones. But not this, not something invisible, unprovoked, not something that grew worse with every breath. For 4 days, Elias had done everything he could. He'd shielded Noah from hyenas during the night. He'd lay beside him during the day to block the sun, his thick mane a wall against the burning heat. He'd gone without food and ignored the scent of prey moving nearby. Nothing else mattered. But this morning, the 5th morning, was different. Noah hadn't moved at all since the stars disappeared. He hadn't whimpered, hadn't even trembled. He only breathed in shallow, fragile gasps, his face deformed by the pressure building behind that swollen eye. Elias knew. Somewhere in the deep place inside him that didn't speak in words but in feeling and fire, He knew. If he didn't act now, there would be no sixth sunrise for Noah. But what could he do? The wild offered no solutions. The other lions had moved on days ago, uninterested in the sick cub that smelled wrong. The scavengers circled each night a little closer. Even the wind seemed to pass them by now, unwilling to carry the scent of something so small and dying. Elias's gaze swept the horizon. Far in the distance, the glint of something unnatural, metal, glass, motion, caught his eye. Humans. He remembered them, vaguely. A distant memory from when he was younger, when something sharp had lodged in his paw, and a strange creature with gentle hands had taken it out. The smell of chemicals, the feeling of being watched, not hunted. Not safe, but not in danger either. Could they help? He turned back to Noah, whose flank barely rose and fell. The eye, it looked like it might burst. For the first time in his life, Elias made a choice that defied everything his bloodline had ever taught him. He left. Not for food, not to patrol Aduana's territory, not to abandon. He walked away from his son, not out of instinct, but out of desperation. Step by step, head low, paws silent on the dry earth, Elias headed toward the only thing left that might offer hope: humans. And somewhere across the plains, beneath the slow-burning sun, the faint rumble of an engine began to echo through the silence. Hope is a fragile thing in the wild, but sometimes, even here, it grows. Noah had once followed every movement of the world with wide, curious eyes. The sway of grass, the flicker of insects, the shadow of birds crossing the sun. Nothing escaped his attention. But now, the world had narrowed to pain. The swelling around his left eye had grown overnight, stretching the skin until it looked thin and fragile, as if it might tear with the slightest touch. The eye itself was sealed shut, buried beneath pressure that pulsed with every heartbeat. When Noah tried to lift his head, a sharp tremor ran through his small body, and he let out a faint, broken sound that barely carried beyond his chest. Elias heard it. He heard everything. He moved closer, lowering himself beside the cub, his massive frame careful not to disturb him. The lion pressed his nose gently against Noah's neck, breathing in the familiar scent that told him his son was still alive, for now. But the smell was changing. There was a sharpness beneath it, something wrong, something that did not belong to the wild. Elias licked the cub's face, slow and deliberate. His tongue brushed the swollen area, and Noah flinched violently. The pain was immediate and overwhelming. Elias pulled back at once, startled, his ears flattening as a low rumble rose in his chest. He had faced rival males, stampeding herds, and nights filled with danger. But this was different. This was a threat he could not see, could not fight. The cub tried to stand. His front paws pushed against the earth, claws digging into the dry soil. For a moment, it seemed as though he might succeed. Then his legs buckled. Noah collapsed onto his side, breathing fast and uneven, the effort having drained what little strength remained. Dust clung to his fur. His good eye stared ahead, unfocused, as though the world had slipped just beyond reach. Elias stood over him, torn between instinct and fear. In the wild, weakness was unforgiving. A cub that could not walk would not survive long. Yet every fiber of Elias's being rejected that truth. He nudged Noah again, softer this time, urging him to rest, to save what energy he had left. The swelling had begun to pull Noah's head to one side. His balance was gone. The pressure behind that eye was relentless, stealing not only his sight, but his sense of direction, his coordination, his will to move. Each breath came slower than the last. Elias remembered other cubs he had seen over the years, scratched, bruised, even limping after rough play. Those injuries faded. Time healed them. This one did not. This one grew worse with every hour, as though something unseen was feeding on the cub's strength. By midday, the heat became unbearable. Elias positioned himself so his shadow fell across Noah's body, blocking the sun as best he could. He had not eaten since before the swelling worsened, but hunger no longer mattered. Survival had narrowed to one fragile life beneath him. The pain in Noah's eye was no longer just pain. It was confusion, fear, the terror of not understanding why his body would not obey him. When Elias moved, Noah tried to follow with his gaze, but his head lagged behind, movements delayed and uncertain. The cub no longer trusted his own senses. Elias felt something shift inside him, a quiet realization, heavy and irreversible. This was not an injury that rest could fix. This was not something patience could solve. Whatever was happening inside Noah's eye was advancing, spreading deeper, stronger. Left alone, it would take everything. In the wild, there were no answers for this kind of natural health crisis. No remedies. No emergency veterinary care. No medical treatment hidden in the grass. Elias could protect his son from predators, from hunger, from cold, but not from this. As the afternoon wore on, Noah's breathing grew shallow. His chest barely rose beneath his ribs. Elias lowered himself once more, pressing his side against the cub's body, sharing warmth, sharing presence. It was the only comfort he could offer. Somewhere beyond the plains, far past the acacia trees and dry riverbeds, humans lived with knowledge Elias did not possess. Tools, medicine, the kind of wildlife rescue that belonged to another world entirely. Elias did not understand it, but he understood this. If nothing changed, Noah would not last another day. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the savannah. The light caught the swollen eye, making it glisten unnaturally. Elias looked at it, then away, as if refusing to accept what it meant. For the first time since Noah was born, Elias felt the ground beneath him shift, not from danger, but from decision. Something inside him was preparing to break from instinct, to choose a path no lion was meant to take. And the night, when it came, would not be kind. The beginning had been so small that no one, not even a watchful father, could have stopped it. Days earlier, when Noah had still been strong enough to stumble after butterflies and chase the wind through the grass, a sudden gust had swept across the plains. Fine sand lifted into the air, stinging eyes and noses alike. Noah had shaken his head, pawed at his face, then bounded on, unaware that a single grain had scraped the delicate surface of his eye. It should have healed. In the wild, it usually did. But the savannah carried more than dust. Invisible to Elias, bacteria clung to the sand, thriving in heat and dryness. The tiny scratch became a doorway. By nightfall, infection had begun to spread beneath the surface, deep where the body could not fight it alone. At first, Noah only blinked more often. He squinted when the sun was bright. Elias noticed, but nothing about it seemed urgent. Cubs were resilient. Pain passed. Strength returned. That was the rhythm of life here. This time, it didn't. As the infection grew, pressure built slowly behind the eye. Tissue swelled. Blood flow tightened. Each hour added more pain, more confusion, more weakness. The wild had no antibiotics, no emergency medical care, no way to drain the poison collecting where the eye met the skull. By the second night, Noah had stopped playing entirely. By the third, he could no longer keep his balance. Elias had watched his son walk in circles, then collapse, frightened by a world that no longer made sense. Now, on the edge of the fifth day, the damage was unmistakable. The swollen eye was no longer just inflamed, it was dangerous. The skin around it stretched tight, shining faintly in the sun. Heat radiated from the area, carrying the sharp, sour scent of infection. Elias could smell it now. It told him what his instincts could not explain. This sickness was alive, and it was winning. Elias paced for the first time since dawn, his steps slow and uncertain. He circled Noah, searching for something, anything that might ease the pain. He lay down, stood again, then pressed his head to the ground beside his son, listening to the uneven rhythm of Noah's breathing. In the distance, vultures gathered on a dead tree. They watched patiently. They always did. The sight stirred a low growl in Elias's chest. He chased them away with a burst of strength fueled by anger. But when he returned, Noah had not moved. The effort had cost Elias precious energy, and the truth settled heavier than before. Protection was no longer enough. The wild was built to test strength, not to treat illness. It rewarded speed and power, not endurance through pain. What Noah needed now was not another night of guarding, not another day of shade and warmth. He needed intervention, something beyond instinct, beyond teeth and claws. Somewhere far away, humans had knowledge the wild did not. Elias remembered the sharp smell of antiseptic from long ago, the sting that faded after a wound was cleaned. He remembered hands that removed pain rather than inflicting it. At the time, he had escaped as soon as he could. Trust had not been part of the exchange. Now, trust was all that remained. Elias returned to Noah's side and lay down fully, his body curved protectively around the cub. Noah stirred faintly, leaning into the warmth, unaware of how close he was to slipping away. Elias closed his eyes for a moment, memorizing the feel of his son's breathing, the weight of him, the sound. This was not surrender, it was understanding. The infection would not stop on its own. Left untreated, it would spread deeper, threaten the brain, and end everything. Elias did not know the words for it, abscess, pressure, sepsis, but he understood the meaning all the same. If Noah was going to survive, the answer would not come from the grass beneath them. As the sun lowered and the light softened, Elias lifted his head and looked once more toward the distant horizon, where human paths crossed the land. Wildlife conservation, medical treatment, emergency response, these were not concepts he knew, but he knew hope when he felt it. And hope, fragile as it was, waited somewhere beyond the plains. When night came, Elias did not sleep. He waited. The nights had grown longer, though the moon still passed overhead in its usual, indifferent way. For 4 full turns of the stars, Elias had not slept, not truly, not the kind of sleep that lets the body mend or the mind rest. His eyes stayed half open in the dark, his ears catching every rustle in the grass, every insect's hum, every shadow that might come too close. Noah didn't stir much anymore. The cub's small chest rose and fell, but more faintly than the night before. Elias counted each breath in his head, holding them as though he could somehow protect his son by keeping track. But numbers were no defense. They only marked how close the danger had crept. During the second night, hyenas had approached. Their laughter had echoed across the plain, sharp and cruel. Elias had stood tall then, mane bristling, and roared so deeply the ground itself seemed to shake. The scavengers scattered, but he knew they'd return. They always did when weakness lingered. The third night brought silence instead, an even crueler visitor. No wind, no sounds of distant herds, just stillness, the kind that made the world feel like it was holding its breath. Elias curled around Noah tighter than before, his great body forming a wall of muscle and warmth. He felt the heat rising from the infected eye, now worse than ever. The skin around it had turned a dark red, almost black. The swelling reached the cub's temple now, pressure so intense it looked as if it might split open. And still, Noah did not cry. He hadn't made a sound in hours. Pain had stolen even that. The wild held no mercy for the sick. That was the rule Elias had always known. Yet watching his son suffer, motionless, helpless, something in him rebelled against it. The rules no longer made sense. What good was strength if it could not protect? On the fourth night, a new sound arrived, not from the bush, not from the sky, from Noah. It was small, just a soft, breathy whimper. But it pierced Elias more sharply than any claw. It wasn't just pain. It was a plea. The kind of sound a cub makes when it no longer understands what's happening to its own body. Elias stood quickly, agitated, scanning the horizon again and again, the distant trees, the stars, the shape of the hills. But nothing changed, nothing ever did. This world offered no medical support, no veterinary help, no emergency intervention. It offered silence and death and waiting. Noah coughed, dry and weak, and his body shifted involuntarily. Elias rushed back to his side and nudged him with his nose, gently at first, then harder. Noah didn't respond. The breath still came, but barely. The eye. It was leaking now. A thin trail of yellow fluid had begun to ooze from the corner. The infection had found its way out, but not enough. Not fast enough. Elias lowered his head, pressing his forehead gently to Noah's. He stayed there, motionless, for a long time. He was losing him, and there was nothing left to try. In the distance, a noise, faint, metallic, unnatural, not a predator, not a prey animal. Elias lifted his head. It came again, a low, rolling sound. He had heard it before, many seasons ago. Vehicles, human machines, movement that didn't belong to the natural rhythm of the plains. Could they help? Elias didn't know. But the memory of scent, of antiseptic and strange rubbery gloves rose in him again. Years earlier, he'd been wounded in a territorial fight. A truck had approached, too fast to run, a loud bang, then darkness when he awoke. The pain in his leg was gone. Something had changed it, fixed it. He had fled as soon as he could stand. But now his son was slipping away. And Elias no longer cared about pride or territory or the old law of the wild. He turned toward the sound. Noah lay behind him, still and small and failing. The night stretched long ahead, but a choice had begun to form, a direction. Elias looked back once, then faced the distant hills. Tomorrow, at first light, he would walk. And he would not walk for food or for power or even for survival. He would walk for his son. Dawn had not yet broken when Elias rose to his feet. The sky was still a deep indigo, the stars beginning to fade in the east, but a low chill clung to the Savannah. The ground beneath his paws was dry and cracked, and everything around him held the stillness that comes just before the first light. For a long moment he stood perfectly still, staring down at the small figure curled beside him. Noah had not moved during the night. His breathing was shallow, inconsistent. The fur on his face was matted from the slow weeping of the infected eye. The swelling had reached a point that made Elias shiver, not from fear, but from a feeling he had no name for, the kind of feeling that builds when everything you know no longer works. The wild had no more answers to offer. Instinct had failed. Elias lowered his head and pressed his nose gently against Noah's ear. Nothing. He nudged again, firm but careful. Noah stirred slightly, a faint flick of his tail, a sigh from somewhere deep within. Elias closed his eyes, letting out a slow exhale through his nostrils. His son was still fighting, but barely. That's when the sound returned. Far off, across the low hills and dry grass, came the distant hum of a machine. A truck. Elias didn't know the word, but he knew the vibration, the unnatural rhythm of movement that did not belong to hoof or paw. Somewhere, out there, humans were awake, and they were close enough to reach. The decision came like a breaking wave, sudden, final. Elias turned away from his son. He didn't look back. Each step away from Noah felt unnatural, like walking with a torn muscle or a twisted bone. His body screamed against it. This was not how lions behaved. No lion left a cub behind. No lion trusted humans. But Elias was no longer acting as a lion. He was acting as a father. He moved quickly but deliberately, scanning the horizon, his head low, ears swiveling for danger. Every instinct told him to return to Noah, to stay and protect. But he pushed forward. His muscles burned from days without rest, but he didn't slow down. By mid-morning, the sun began its cruel climb. Heat shimmered off the ground, and the wind turned dry and sharp. Elias's tongue lolled from his mouth, panting now, but he didn't stop. Somewhere ahead, he could smell it. Rubber, fuel, metal. Unnatural things. Human things. The scent brought memory. He had been a young lion then, bleeding from a deep wound on his leg after a fight. The pain had slowed him until he could no longer hide. A roar of engines. A dart. Then stillness. Then hands. Strange touches. Smells that burned his nose. Disinfectant, latex, iodine. He had awoken days later, whole. Back then, he had run. Now, he was running toward it. Across the ridge, just before noon, he saw it. Movement. 2 vehicles crawling along the dirt road in the distance. One white, one tan. Windows glinting in the light. Elias stopped at the edge of a low rise. He was visible here, exposed. His heart pounded in his chest, not from exhaustion, but from something dangerously close to fear. He had never approached humans willingly. Not like this. Still, he stepped forward. At first, the vehicles did not slow. They continued their slow roll across the landscape, dust curling up behind them. Elias moved down the rise and across the open field, his body tall and deliberate. He made no attempt to hide. And then, they stopped. Engines idled. Doors opened. Figures emerged, small compared to him. Covered in cloth, hats, holding binoculars and cameras. One raised a hand, another stepped back. He heard someone call out, a voice, sharp with confusion. Then he did something that no wild lion had done before. He turned, walked a few steps away, and looked back. He repeated it, again. Walk, turn, look, wait. The humans followed him with their eyes, unmoving, still trying to decide if this was real, if what they were seeing made sense. Walk, turn, look, wait. One of them finally stepped forward, then another. Elias took one last glance at the horizon, the way back to Noah, and roared. Not a sound of threat, not a call to fight, but a cry, a warning, a plea. The humans moved, not fast, not loud, but they moved, slowly, carefully. Elias turned and walked ahead, his pace slower now, glancing back every few strides. He had done it. He had made the choice no lion ever makes. He had left his son, not to abandon him, but to find the only hope left. Somewhere behind them, a cub lay dying. Somewhere ahead, humans might save him. The heat was rising fast. By the time Elias began leading the strangers across the plains, the air shimmered with waves of heat, distorting the distant trees and hills. The humans kept their distance, trailing cautiously behind. Their vehicles had been left far behind them now, parked at the edge of a dirt road that rarely saw life outside of passing antelope or a wandering elephant. But none of them had ever followed a lion before, and certainly not like this. One of the humans, a woman with streaks of gray in her braided hair and calm eyes behind thick-rimmed glasses, kept her gaze fixed on Elias. Her name was Sarah Coleman, a senior wildlife conservation officer who had worked in East Africa for more than 3 decades. She had studied lions, tracked them, darted them, rescued them. But this was something else. "Do you see what he's doing?" she whispered to the young vet assistant beside her. "He's leading us." The assistant, Michael Reyes, barely nodded. His eyes were locked on Elias's movements, graceful, deliberate, yet tinged with urgency. The man would walk 10, maybe 15 paces, then stop. He'd glance over his shoulder, waiting. When he saw that the humans were still there, still following, he'd move again. The pattern repeated again and again, unwavering. Not random, not animal behavior, intentional. The small team moved in silence, their boots crunching over dry grass and cracked soil. The only sound was the wind and the slow, steady rhythm of Elias's paws pressing into the earth ahead of them. Hours passed. Elias did not pause for water or rest or shade. The direction was clear, unchanging, driven by something deeper than instinct, something far more fragile. Hope. Sarah had seen injuries of every kind, traps, gunshot wounds, starvation, broken limbs. But she had never seen a wild lion leave his cub. Not unless the cub was dead. And yet, this one wasn't grieving. He was guiding. They crossed through an abandoned riverbed, then up a narrow rise where the Savannah stretched for miles. The heat was dizzying now, but the lion didn't falter. Sarah pressed a damp cloth to her neck, then looked up just in time to see Elias pause. He turned toward her. For a moment, no more than 2 seconds, his eyes met hers. And in that brief, impossible instant, she felt something pass between them, not fear, not dominance, a plea. Then he turned forward again and continued. By mid-afternoon, the group was tired, thirsty, and silent. But none of them stopped. None of them dared, because now they believed it too. "This is a medical emergency," Michael muttered under his breath. "Whatever's waiting at the end of this, it's bad." Sarah didn't answer. She already knew. She had seen enough signs: sickness, decay, the scent of infection that sometimes carried on the wind. And now she noticed something else. The vultures. They had returned, circling far ahead, low and slow, watching, waiting. Sarah picked up her pace. Behind her, one of the team members radioed back to the mobile clinic. "Be ready. We may have a cub in critical condition. We'll need full support, IVs, antibiotics, draining equipment. It's likely an abscess. Prepare for wildlife rescue intervention." Elias moved faster now. The final stretch of land sloped downward toward a patch of sparse trees. The air was thicker here, heavier. The vultures were closer now, their dark shapes drifting just above the horizon. Sarah's heart beat faster. She reached for the tranquilizer rifle slung across her back, just in case. But she didn't raise it, not unless she had to. Finally, Elias stopped. Not the kind of stop to wait. The kind of stop that says, "We've arrived." He looked back one last time, then turned and walked slowly into the brush. The humans followed, carefully, quietly. There, beneath the shade of a thorn acacia, lay Noah. From a distance, he looked like he might be sleeping. But as they approached, Sarah's trained eyes saw the truth. The bloated eye, the shallow rise and fall of his chest, the twitch of his hind leg, the discharge along his cheek. "Oh no," she whispered, dropping to her knees. Michael was already opening his emergency medical kit. "This is advanced orbital swelling, definitely abscessed, possibly septic. If we don't relieve that pressure soon, he's not going to make it." Sarah turned to Elias, who had stepped back, but not far. He stood just behind a low bush, head low, shoulders tight. Watching. She placed one hand over her heart, then extended it toward him. "It's okay," she said softly. "We're here to help." The lion didn't move, but he didn't run. There are moments in the wild when time no longer follows its usual pace. It either stretches, achingly slow, or collapses into a blink. For Sarah Coleman, as she knelt beside the sick cub, everything felt suspended. Noah was barely alive. His breathing was shallow and erratic, his ribs barely moving beneath the matted fur. The eye on the left side of his face was now grotesquely swollen, larger than she'd ever seen in a wild cub. The surrounding tissue was inflamed and discolored, the infection spreading deeper, threatening more than just sight. Michael didn't hesitate. He opened his field case and called out calmly, "We need fluids, local anesthetic, iodine, and a scalpel. Prepare for immediate drainage." The team moved quickly, but without panic. They had trained for this: emergency field treatment, mobile wildlife surgery, even critical pediatric procedures. But never under the eyes of a wild lion. Elias stood only 10 feet away, unmoving, watching. The lion's gaze never left the hands that touched his son. His body was tense, but his tail did not twitch. His ears did not flatten. He did not growl. He only watched, as if holding every instinct at bay, with sheer will. Sarah spoke softly as she cleaned the cub's face. "You've been strong, little one. Stay with us now." Noah flinched at the touch, a weak twitch of his paw, then stilled again. Michael leaned close, inspecting the area around the swelling. "It's full, pus and gas under pressure. This is a massive abscess, likely stemming from a scratch that went septic. If we don't release it now, it could rupture internally." Sarah nodded and steadied the cub's head as the local anesthetic took effect. The procedure would be painful, even with the medication. But there was no time to wait. With precise hands, Michael made the incision. The response was immediate. A thick stream of cloudy fluid burst from the wound, releasing the intense pressure that had been crushing the tissue behind the eye. The smell was sharp and unmistakable, deep infection, festering too long. But with it came a shift. Noah let out a weak sound, barely a mewl, but it was more than he'd made in hours. Elias stepped forward. Sarah froze, one hand raised. "Easy," she said gently, her voice calm and even. "It's okay." Elias stopped, his eyes locked with hers for the second time that day. She didn't look away. "We're not hurting him," she said. "We're giving him a chance." As if understanding, Elias sat down. Not far, not relaxed, but still. The team continued, flushing the wound with sterile saline, applying antibiotic ointment, then wrapping the side of the cub's face with soft, breathable gauze. Noah twitched under their hands, muscles reacting involuntarily as blood began circulating more freely to the damaged tissue. The fluids helped. So did the quiet, steady hands. By the time the wound was clean and the pressure reduced, the swelling had already begun to recede slightly. Not gone, not healed, but moving in the right direction. Alive. Sarah placed a gentle hand on Noah's chest. She could feel the heart beating stronger now, still weak, but steady. She exhaled, deep and slow, and wiped her forehead with the back of her glove. "We're through the worst of it," she said. Michael nodded, his hands still working. We'll need to monitor him, but this may have saved his life." Another team member brought over a thermal blanket, specially designed for wildlife emergencies, and draped it gently over the cub's back. They tucked in the edges, keeping his body warm as the sedatives wore off. Elias stood and took one slow step closer. Everyone froze again, but the lion did not approach. He simply looked down, then lay beside Noah. Their bodies didn't touch, but the space between them held something sacred, reunion, relief, and something no one could quite name. Sarah stood back, taking in the image. A father lion beside his injured son, both silent, both breathing. This wasn't a rescue they'd read about in training manuals. It was something deeper. As the team began packing their equipment, Sarah radioed back to base. "We've stabilized the cub, pressure drained, antibiotics administered. We'll leave medical support on site, but the father won't allow relocation. We'll observe remotely for now." There was a pause on the line, then a quiet reply. "Copy that. He's lucky." Sarah looked over at Elias, still lying watchfully beside Noah. "No," she whispered. "He's loved." When dawn returned, it came not with urgency, but with grace. The sun rose slowly over the Makulu plains, spilling a soft gold across the dry earth. The wind, once harsh and unforgiving, had gentled overnight. Its breeze now carried only the scent of acacia and morning dust. Beneath the broad canopy of a thorn tree, the cub stirred. Noah was still weak, but he was no longer fading. The swelling around his left eye had reduced significantly. The bandage applied the day before held firm, clean, and undisturbed. A light flutter in his whiskers. A slow stretch of his paw. And then, tentatively, Noah opened his right eye. Just one. But that single blink marked something larger than survival. It marked return. Elias was there, of course. He had never left. The father lion lay in a half-circle around the cub, his body forming a barrier that no shadow, no predator, and no fear could pass. He had stayed through the night, ears twitching at every sound, head lifting with each movement from the team stationed nearby. They had not interfered again. They hadn't needed to. Sarah watched from a respectful distance, binoculars in hand, seated beside the mobile field station truck. The engine was off. There was no hum of machinery now, only silence and breath. "He's stable," Michael said softly beside her. "The wound's draining properly. He might even keep the eye if infection stays down. We'll keep the antibiotics in place, but the immune system is doing its part now." Sarah didn't speak right away. Her eyes remained fixed on Elias. She'd studied lions for a lifetime, observed their behaviors, mapped their migrations, cataloged their calls, but nothing in her field journals could explain what she'd witnessed over the past 24 hours. No biology textbook had prepared her for a wild male lion choosing to ask for help. And trusting it. The wildlife rescue team would remain nearby for a few more days, monitoring the cub's recovery. Portable solar panels powered a small refrigeration unit for the medicine. A live satellite uplink transmitted real-time updates to the Veterinary Support Center in Nairobi. High-tech tools for a low-tech miracle. "I still can't believe he brought us to him," Michael murmured. Sarah smiled faintly. "It's not that hard to believe," she said. "Not when it's your own child." Mid-morning, Noah lifted his head. It took effort. Every muscle in his neck trembled with the motion. But he managed to sit up, awkwardly, unevenly, but up nonetheless. Elias immediately responded, standing and stepping closer, gently pressing his nose into Noah's side. The cub leaned into the touch, and for the first time in nearly 6 days, Elias laid down completely, not alert, not on guard, but at rest. His eyes remained open, but the tension in his body finally eased. For a lion who had defied instinct, risked his life, and sought out a species he should never have trusted, this was peace. From the ridge above, a camera crew from a conservation media project had arrived that morning. They had captured the moment. See a cub rising beside his father, alive because of intervention, because of technology, because of heart. The story would go on to be featured in wildlife documentaries, in academic lectures on animal cognition, in think pieces on empathy and connection. But in that quiet moment, there were no headlines, just breath, just life, and the miracle of one decision that had changed everything. Later that afternoon, the team would pack up. The medical supplies would be left in a secured box beneath the tree where Sarah and Michael would return daily to check progress from a distance. But for now, they let the moment be. Before leaving, Sarah stepped as close as she dared. She didn't speak. She simply nodded, once, to Elias, who lifted his head and looked at her with those dark, ancient eyes. Not predator, not beast, just a father. As the truck rumbled back toward the reserve station, the planes returned to silence. Over the next several days, Noah would recover further, slowly but surely. The infection would recede, the swelling would vanish. And one morning, he would rise without pain and take his first steps again beside the lion who had refused to give up. No one would ever tell the story quite the same. Because the story wasn't about survival alone. It was about love. And the day a lion left the wild behind, for just long enough to bring it back home. If this story touched your heart even just a little, leave a simple 1 in the comments so we know you were here. It may seem small, but your one comment helps keep stories like this alive and seen by more kind souls around the world. And if you'd like to follow more true, emotional stories from the wild, don't forget to subscribe. We've got many more journeys waiting, stories of courage, connection, and the kind of love that crosses all boundaries. We'll see you in the next one.